recording. And I'll just say, introduce myself. Hi, my name is Chris Price. I am the Academic Programs Manager for the SUNY Center for Professional Development. And this is actually our first SUNY Assessment Community of Practice webinar. So just a quick background, we decided the SUNY Council on Assessment, a group of us who work on a subcommittee in the SCOA group around organizing professional development activities and events and services for SUNY. Thought it would be a good idea to really start to generate a community of practice around assessment. We have a lot of great assessment experience and a lot of people with a lot of expertise throughout SUNY in assessment. And we would like to see that shared more widely throughout the system. And so this webinar today is our first kind of attempt to start doing that. So I'm going to, if the recording for today's session will actually live in the workplace group for the SUNY, the Assessment Community of Practice. I just put the link in the chat. So if you want the recording, you're going to have to sign up for the group if you're not signed up already. And I'm also going to put my email address in the chat. So if you are interested in either presenting on something, oh look, Nicole had a slide ready and everything. Awesome. I'm sorry if I'm stealing your thunder, Nicole. So if you're interested in presenting at one of these webinars, you can email me, and I'll pass it along to the others in that subgroup of SCOA. Or if you're interested in a topic that you want to learn more about, you could also email me that as well. And so today we have Dr. Kirk Jones, the Director of Assessment and the Chair of the Department of English and Humanities at SUNY Canton. And just recently, who defended her dissertation, Dr. Nicole Childrose, who's the non-academic assessment chair and associate professor of history at Columbia-Greene Community College, and also the co-chair of SCOA. So congratulations, Nicole. And I'm going to turn off my screen. And if you have any questions or any comments, put in the chat. I'll make sure to get them to Nicole and Kirk as we go along.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Chris. I just want to make sure that my screen is sharing and that you're able to hear me, Chris.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. I think this is an exciting moment. Assessment is such a big part of everything that we do, and we realize that many folks are really working in the trenches to make this happen, and to sometimes are kind of feeling alone in the processes and the technology choices that have to be made to get all of this done. So that really inspired Kirk and I to collaborate. Him and I have very different experiences as far as how our campuses have adopted and leveraged technology. So we're really looking forward to sharing our experiences today, and we want to hear your thoughts as well. So I'll just go ahead and get started. If I can advance my slide here. Let me see. Okay, so I did want to just spend a minute.
Nicole, you stop sharing your screen.
Whoop. Let me go back. Chris, I think you may have to, for some reason.
I'm not sharing my screen, so you should be able to hit that green button and share it again. You were there. There it is.
Okay. Is that sharing?
Yes, you just have to do the slideshow.
All good?
Looks good.
Okay. So I did want to just spend a few minutes talking about the SUNY Council on Assessment, and we do have a web page. So if you just Google SUNY Council on Assessment, it will pull up our page. And we offer really 3 major tools for folks. The first being once a year in the fall, our regional drive-ins. We try to host these in central part, southern part, and western part of the state. And they're a really great, you know, come in, get a lot of information without spending a huge amount of money. I think it's like $35 to attend. Please look out for those happening every fall. And we do switch the theme every year to focus on something current that's really a big topic that folks find interesting. We also invite you to consider hosting one of these at your institution, and please send us your thoughts as far as topics that you'd like to see. We partner with CPD offering certificate programs and a new assessment leadership course. So please look into possibly thinking about that. And we also try to roll out other resources such as rubrics, and try to provide one-on-one support. We're also doing some customized workshops now if campuses are interested in any of that. So today the focus is to really drill down on the tools that we're using and how that impacts campus culture, and vice versa, the tools impacting culture, and culture impacting the choice of the tools that we use, and how to make those decisions. I know for my campus, as I'll talk about, we're going through a transitional moment where we're actually adopting technology, and I know people are at different phases of that. Maybe folks already have technology but want to leverage that in different ways. So it's our hope today that you will hear our conversation about managing the more technical components of assessment processes, and that you'll hear from us about some lessons that we've learned as we've gone through the process. And I think that Chris is managing the chat for us for most of the time, so I'm not looking at that, but please feel free to type in the chat. So of course, we have some outcomes. We're hoping that you can think about and appraise your campus culture to make more informed decisions about effective processes. We hope that you can evaluate your current processes, and again, hearing from our stories, maybe be inspired to think about different ways to build and use those tools. Also to recognize how to generate bottom-up support for assessment while managing the more technical components of the process. I found that in working with so many campuses, as well as going through our own trial and error, that if people don't find inputting their data easy, then they're simply not going to do it. And that goes along with the return on investment of their time, what they're getting out of that, and is it accessible. Also, to relate these lessons learned to hopefully your experiences, we are going to save some time at the end so that we can have. So Chris already shared a bit about me, and we have a contact slide at the end. Okay. So of course, where I'm coming from with this, and I want to invite everyone to our website, which we are a 2-year community college. Small. We have population is a little over 40, and the area that I really focus on is our functional area assessment, or what we call non-academic assessment. So we have about 30 units, and just to give you an idea of the scope of that, a unit can be anywhere from 1 person to maybe 5 or 6 people in any given area. So that poses some challenges, but also some great opportunity. We had recent leadership changes, so we have a brilliant new president, we have a new provost, dean of academic affairs. They are very, very interested in what we're doing and leading a charge of adopting new and innovative technology. So we're also going through some sweeping technology conversions. We are just converting to Banner from an old Poise system. I think we're one of the last colleges probably to go through this. And we're also adopting, as I said, Campus Lab assessment software. So I'm going to mostly focus on in the last 10 years where we've been with this. So our culture as it was. In about 2010, we went through an accreditation experience that, like many other campuses, didn't go so well on a couple of areas, mostly on our functional area assessment. And, you know, that was common. The standard 7 and 14 work that we needed to actually show what we were doing more. So out of that warning status came a great deal of effort being directed to come off of that status. And I just want to say that we successfully did pull that together. And not only did we come off warning, but we received commendations for the work that we did. We are really a campus culture of committee work. So many of us wear multiple hats. So as a faculty member, we might be serving on 3 or 4 other committees, and our assessment work happens in committees. So we have academic assessment committee, a non-academic committee, and then like an umbrella committee that we call institutional assessment planning group. And at the time of our accreditation 10 years ago, we actually went through some restructuring of those committees to make it a more seamless process. We also have a strategic planning committee, and so we meet monthly, and we're small enough that there's just constant ongoing work and a really personal sort of relationship that goes on with the work that we're doing. As far as the technology, we spent our efforts growing our own technology. So I'm going to talk about the way that we use Blackboard for our academic assessment, the way that we use our website. We have a great web team, small team, so we're able to upload things that we want to, you know, publicly share on our website. We also use the intranet for our functional area assessment to a degree, and I'll share a bit more on that. So that's not public facing, it's just for employees to use, but it's a great way to store things. And we use some shared drives. We use Microsoft Word, we use Excel, and again, I have some additional slides on that. We were really limited in terms of time that we had to kind of pull things together in a sustainable way. So we went through iterations to really build effective tools that everyone and anyone could use. And we had very limited resources to do this. So I'm sure many other folks can relate to this. I would say at that time, 10 years ago, we were in a reactive phase, but to fast forward to today, we're definitely in a proactive culture. So I'll just go on to the next slide. We had several champions of assessment that had been really ingrained in our culture and led our efforts. So some longtime faculty, as well as staff who were really familiar with existing technology that we had. And one of my great colleagues had said, we need to really begin with the end in mind because we don't have resources to waste. We don't have a lot of time. And even a decade later, this has really stuck with us. So we did have enthusiastic faculty. We had staff that really pulled together and were allies. And we had supportive administrators at the time. I would say, comparatively speaking, you know, new leadership is really fluent in this, but I can't say that there were any major roadblocks to the work that we were doing. So as I said, we began by restructuring the committees, allocating time and limited resources to really pull this together. We redefined roles and actually provided some release time, which I think is important to mention, for faculty that were really involved in creating some of this technology. So we were prioritizing assessment as a campus. At every all-college meeting, which we have 2 a year, the entire campus would come together and just sort of provide updates as to where we were. We recognize the importance of forming alliances interdepartmentally and championing this change throughout everything that we were doing. And I'll admit it was trial and error to understand what would work, and we constantly, even today, are reassessing the system. But I think that there's something to be said for that. And the other point that I want to really emphasize is that any and all new hires were asked about how they felt about assessment, but more importantly, what did they know about it, and what could they offer and bring to the table. So as a lot of folks were retiring we have people that have worked there 40, 30 years. It's not uncommon. As new blood was coming in, we made sure that they were embracing what we were doing and our expectations, embedding assessment in everything. So to bring you to where we are today, I would say that we have rich, multifaceted assessment processes that are dynamic, that are sustainable. We see the return on investment. We're digging into our data in new ways. We have a homegrown system that we're very proud of, that we feel anyone can sort of walk into their role, understand it. We often compare it to online shopping where you're pointing, clicking. We've really tried to simplify it for folks. It's free. That's the best thing. And it's widely used. So we have an expectation that as far as faculty, they're assessing their courses every semester across the board. And that includes adjuncts. So we need to be able to easily train them to use the tools. And the same goes for functional units. They're assessing yearly. So we have an all-in approach, and we hope that as we're moving to new software, which we already know what we expect out of it, that we're less person dependent, and it will allow us to really do a deeper dive. As far as knowing our technology, we got creative. So without resources to invest, we literally built tools using Word and Excel. So I'll share what that looks like. We already used Blackboard as our LMS. So we housed all of our course assessment plans, academic resources. Blackboard use on our campus is really limited to faculty mostly. There are some committees that use it, but we were able to at least house everything there and provide some training on Blackboard. And then I do want to just talk about Google Forms. This is a tool that I've used when working with other campuses because anyone can use it. So you have to think carefully about like how it's being stored, but at least if you want to build a template that can be sent to everyone, that is another free tool that I find works pretty well. So I just wanted to show you what our Blackboard looks like, and I want to kind of just quickly go through this so that Kirk can share as well. But this is what our course assessment reporting form looks like. So faculty will pull this up whenever they want to do their assessment. They will fill in their assessment methods, and then they'll plug in their information. They will then send that to our brilliant Diana Smith, who works in the IE office, who does manually go through this and uploads the information. So that is pretty work intensive. So we're hoping to get away from that with our new technology. But nonetheless, it's worked really well, and we're small enough to be able to do something like this. On this slide, I just wanted to show you what our functional area assessment plan looks like. Or I'm sorry, this is our course assessment plan, just a closer look, getting ahead of myself here. So again, just their outcomes are already there. So this was a great use of Excel. All they have to do is fill in the dates and fill in the exact information for that course at that time. So this is what my Western Civ course looks like. So now just to bounce to the more functional area aspects, we share on our Columbia-Greene webpage under planning and institutional effectiveness, our vision, mission, as well as what I really wanted to show here was the yearly report cards that we do. So we find that when everyone realizes on our campus where this information is going, it really helps to sustain our efforts. So we produce, Casey O'Brien, our Dean of IE and Planning, produces a yearly report card. So the report card includes information from functional areas. And we also have a resource guide, so the NAC resource guide that folks can pull up, and that's going to guide them through our process. It includes a glossary, everything that they need to know to successfully fill out what we call an action and assessment plan template. So that's the functional area assessment that they do annually. So that's what this looks like to them. So again, they'll pull this up from their computer and they'll just plug in their information. So we're looking for their SMART goal. I just want to skip to the 6th item on this, and I apologize that it might look a little fuzzy, but we do require that they send this to their dean, who approves it, then to our committee. So again, it's a lot of manual sending, but it's all there, everything that they need, and they can see where they are in the process at any given time. And lastly, I just wanted to share the Google Forms. So this is something anyone could build. You can pull up a Google form and customize it. And this is something that I'm happy to share more on with anyone who wants to think about this. The one thing I like is that it generates sort of like a dashboard for you. So even though it's not a deep dive into any of the data, it's a quick look. So you can at least see on the dashboard who's submitting it, where they're at in the process, and that sort of thing. So just to summarize our technology, the pros were that everything that we were doing is free. And I say free cautiously because, of course, it does take human resources and tremendous skill set to be able to develop these tools. So it's free in the sense that we weren't investing in, outside software. We were able to really fully, in building this, understand our entire system and the process therein. So I think there's value in that, because now as we're transitioning to a tool, we're able to say we want it to look like this. So really understanding and building the entire thing from the ground up has been helpful. And I think it's given us confidence to do bigger things with our assessment. It's allowed us complete flexibility. So if something wasn't working, we're instantly able to change it. Although I would say, you don't want to change things too often, because people get used to something and they're more comfortable to at least submit it in that way. But maybe like every year or a couple years to make changes is fine. So we've had full control, which again has helped us in our small setting, and it's adaptable. And there's obvious, drawbacks to this. So it's heavily dependent on people or a team. It's pretty intense when the plans come in. I know my colleagues can attest to this. It demands your attention. There's less ability to aggregate because things aren't automated. It definitely takes time to set up, and it has some limited potential. So again, we're hoping our new product offers greater potential. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to Kirk.
How are you doing, folks? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Just a suggestion is maybe if you guys turn off your video camera, because sometimes that affects the internet quality. So.
Oh yeah, sure.
Great to see you guys.
How do we go about that?
In the bottom, there should be like a little camera thing. You just got to click on it. It'll stop.
It says stop video?
Yep.
There we go.
Now we just hear anything.
Excellent. Hey, that's even better. Now nobody can see me read. Right? This is wonderful.
It was good to see you, but the internet doesn't always like the video.
Let me try to go for screen 2 here and see if this will share effectively. Can everybody see that okay? Or?
Yeah, it looks good. Yep.
Okay, great.
Put it in slideshow.
Presentation mode. Yep. Current slide. There we go. Everything set, folks?
Looks good.
Great. So just a little context to start off. SUNY Canton's a 2 to 4 year tech school. We have a student population of around 3,000 students. We have about 3,200, I think, right now. 1/3 of those students are face-to-face traditional students in the dorms. About 1/3 are online students, and then about 1/3 are commuter students from the local area. So we have a pretty broad range of students here. The faculty population is a little over 100. I think it's around 120 or so. And we have folks from engineering, hard sciences, soft sciences, arts, humanities, just a broad range of faculty as well. And each one of these areas carries with them their own understandings and expectations when it comes to assessment. So juggling those various areas has been kind of interesting at times. I will say I think the most interesting idiosyncrasy associated with SUNY Canton is that the humanities and arts, the School of Business and Liberal Arts, have traditionally been a little more receptive to the assessment practices on campus than the School of Engineering, who works regularly with ABET accreditation, but have just not been receptive to the assessment policies and procedures at our campus. But there's good reason for that, and I'll get to that relatively shortly here. Let's see how we can move forward. There we go. Okay. So here you'll see the culture as it was, and this is moving in clockwise fashion. And I think I'll start at the top here. So administration would typically decide on a new model every couple of years, or in some cases every year. So there was a lot of turnover in terms of the methodology or paradigm that we used. There was often, once that model was rushed into action, there would be a lack of training. We did have an academic assessment committee, but it was ultimately seen as a dumping ground for faculty who needed to build their portfolios. The learning curve was incredibly steep. It was hard for incoming faculty to learn the system because we were talking about general education requirements, program assessment, institutional assessment, assessment in the major, all sorts of different areas. And then, of course, the programmatic accrediting bodies at the same time. So faculty had a difficult time. Then with frequent turnover, the only people that remained were the standing members. That was the administration and the folks from institutional effectiveness. And they were often the only people who knew what was going on. When faculty identified model problems, usually the response was to decide on another model. We had faculty on campus who knew a lot about assessment, faculty who worked with program accreditation in particular. They weren't on the academic assessment committee, and that's also for good reason, which we'll discuss shortly. Each time we implemented a new model, it would conflict with what they were already doing, and they would, get upset about that. And again, that's reasonable as well. So the problem was that identifying problems with our assessment paradigm began to replace identifying strengths and weaknesses in student learning. The other big problem was that the people who had the most expertise in assessment on our campus weren't being consulted to help with developing the new paradigms. Faculty would identify problems, but they wouldn't be consulted to identify solutions. So it was really in a deteriorating state when I first took over this position that I'm in now. So what you'll see on the screen is relatively minimalist. What I say probably will have more stock than what you see there. Most everything that's on the screen is pretty common sense approaches to shifting the culture of assessment on a given campus. It's not really listening to faculty that's important. It's how we listen to faculty. It's how we explore models that might work and how we train faculty. So the previous mentality, of course, I've already discussed this briefly, was that we just didn't have time for faculty feedback, or perhaps a more insulting mentality was that faculty didn't have the understanding to provide meaningful feedback. So the first thing that we did when there was an administrative shift was we decided it needed to change, and we decided that the way for this to change was to have some open forums. The open forums worked really well for us because it allowed us to discuss the significant problems, but it also allowed us to identify people who would be helpful and people who would also hinder a shift in the assessment culture. The most valuable thing I got from the forum was learning about the group dynamics, which people tend to feed off of other people, who stays positive and focused, those kind of things. Once the forum was over, we invited faculty in for small group discussions, dividing those who didn't work well together, or dividing people who, and I know this is kind of a buzzword right now in our profession, but dividing people who seem to feed off one another's toxicity. So this divide and discuss, I'm not going to say divide and conquer. I think that's more, it harkens back to that authoritarian approach to assessment, but divide and discuss or divide and understand approach worked really well. What we ultimately found was that some of the angriest people on campus had the best ideas because they had so much experience with programmatic accreditation. But once you took the collective wind out of their sails and started to divide them up into separate groups or smaller groups that were more manageable, they'd actually start to open up and provide us with some really valuable feedback.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm all right. I'm doing a webinar right now. Can you come back?
Oh, sorry.
I didn't.
Got it.
Okay, we got it. Okay, good deal, good deal. Sorry about that, folks. The next thing that we did after that was we explored models that might work, and we trained faculty. This worked out really well also because we ultimately trained faculty by exploring these various models that might work. We started with the faculty who worked in accredited programs that were already assessing on the campus, and we built our institutional model from the scaffolding that they'd already established, and this all became part of the learning process for faculty. This was really valuable for anybody who's trying to shift the assessment culture on their campus. I know that there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction at times to just bulldoze a new assessment paradigm or methodology, and especially if we read about one or we get excited about a new one. But for us, the most important thing was to build an assessment paradigm around the existing structures that were already there, especially for the accredited programs, because they were the most resistant to the new methods of assessment, because they'd been bulldozed in the past and forced into an assessment paradigm that really didn't align effectively with their programmatic assessment. So the next thing we did after we had these initial discussions and kind of talked about the basic scaffolding was we began to divide the academic assessment committee that had traditionally been used as a dumping ground for people who were trying to, build their CVs. Oh, sorry, everything just disappeared. Am I still on, guys? You guys still hear me?
Yes, you're good. Kirk.
Okay, everything disappeared on my end.
I can still see your SUNY Canton shifting the culture slide.
Excellent, excellent. So we broke up the academic assessment committee into several subcommittees. We had a general education committee, a programmatic assessment committee, an institutional student learning outcomes committee. We had a task stream training committee. They were all small committees composed of about 2 or 3 people. And I set it up so that the subcategories or subcommittees that were the easiest to manage, folks would start there, and then they would kind of build their way up through all of these subcommittees. And it wasn't a model that worked for every person. There were a lot of people who, they stayed with one of the subcommittees and they felt very comfortable there. But this model that I used was really great for kind of establishing who our leaders in assessment would be in the future, because the folks who rose through these subcommittees, from general education to institutional outcomes to programmatic self-study, they were the ones who became well-versed in all of the facets of assessment on our campus. Once faculty were well-versed in all of the areas, we have about 3 or 4 of them at this point that are well-versed in all the areas. It took us 2 years to get there. We were ready to start implementing this bottom-up approach a little bit more aggressively. So our culture now has transitioned quite a bit. We have improved institutional memory, so we have transparent mapping, which I'll talk a bit about when we get to the task stream component. And we have more experts, obviously, from the training system that we've implemented. And now that the training is done and the shift has happened from top down to bottom up, we've consolidated all of the subcommittees back into that central academic assessment committee. And then I just engage in training the new faculty who come onto the committee in the different areas, so they at least have an understanding of the various areas in which we assess. In addition to that, we've also consolidated a lot of the assessment obligations on campus to simplify the process. And this brings me to, I think, an important point. Often when I talk about assessment, I tend to make the process either sound more complicated than it is, or I tend to I'm just going to say that. I make it sound more complicated than it is. I think shifting a culture from top down to bottom up is a complicated process. I think taking all of the various areas of assessment, all of the various accrediting bodies and their conflicting ideologies and their conflicting acronyms and all those things, and finding a way to consolidate those and simplify them for faculty, that is a complicated process. The goal is to simplify it. And I'm just I'm talking about the complicated aspect of it because we're all involved in assessment. So the next thing was we have this bottom-up system of assessment. We have a functional system that accounts for growth and change over time. We have continuous training and a manageable cycle now, and we have software that has the potential for growth and change and that's TaskStream. But ultimately, I think any software package that's available out there has the potential for growth and change as well. But there are some downsides, which we'll discuss shortly. This is just a visual representation of the cycle timeline that we have now. And you can see that we have the institutional student learning outcomes. We've consolidated the institutional student learning outcome assessment requirements with the corresponding general education requirements. So communication is GER 10. It's also one of our ISLOs. So this has kind of simplified things a little bit more for us. Folks know what is accounting for what as we move forward. So works out kind of nicely. Going to jump into the technology component now. Again, I think I've said this 85 times. I feel like I'm doing an endorsement for TaskStream. That's not necessarily the case. I think there are other software packages that are great. TaskStream on the pro side, it allows you to map outcomes at the course, program, and institutional levels. It also allows you to aggregate data at the course, program, or institutional level. There's a lot of work involved to build the system up to the functionality that you're looking for, but if you're a larger school, a software package can work really well. The last thing that you want to happen is to have a software package that ultimately costs you, $20,000 a year or something like that, and all it's being used as is a glorified repository. So you want to make sure you understand the full functionality of the system and how much you're going to use before you sink money into this, and that gets to the cons. TaskStream can be relatively costly. It has the potential to be overwhelming. It's a steep learning curve for new faculty, especially if you implement a scale out of the box. We actually had kind of a really difficult situation in our school where we implemented TaskStream, we took it to scale, and then the person who was responsible for helping us take it to scale and hosting the training went on maternity leave. So we spent several months not really sure what we were supposed to do or where we were supposed to go. And I mean, it's no fault of hers. It's no fault of anybody's. It happens. Which leads me to the last thing. The more, I guess it doesn't really successfully lead me to it, but it's there. The more you use this and the more things you use it for, the steeper the learning curve will become. So before use with TaskStream or with any software package, the best thing to do is think of function for faculty and administration. Typically, these software packages, TaskStream in particular, have different functionality for faculty and different functionality for administration or for institutional effectiveness. It's best to start as a supplement to the existing methods of data collection. And I think this is also important. If you have faculty who have methods of data collection that are superior to what TaskStream offers or your software package offers, it's best to, in those cases, let those people continue using the method of data collection that they choose to use, and then just attach the report that they have to their workspace in the software package that you have, or their program workspace on a software package. Create a plan for taking the software package to scale so the scaffolding is in place before you begin. And by all means, avoid taking it to scale right out of the box because the learning curve is so steep that it can be really frustrating for faculty. So for me, the function for faculty versus the function for administration boils down to different forms of mapping. At our school, we have what's called upfront mapping or surface mapping. That's something that we have to add to course outlines or to program assessment maps or curriculum maps. so that the behind the scenes mapping is visible to faculty to the degree that they need it in order to complete assessment. This makes things a lot easier for faculty because all they have to be concerned about is the mapping that directly relates to their assessment obligations. If they have access to the behind the scenes mapping, then they're going to see a lot of mapping that's functional for institutional effectiveness or for aggregation of data on a broader scale. And then that tends to confuse them. It all comes down to that old, the idea that transparency is very valuable until it begins to overwhelm people and frustrate people more than it does help smooth the gears of an efficiently working system, right? So behind the scenes mapping is a function and assessment software where alignment between course, program, and institutional outcomes can be established to effectively aggregate data. This is an example of surface mapping or upfront mapping. These outcomes aren't the greatest. This is just a hypothetical example, but you can see here that the course student learning outcomes are mapped to the program student learning outcomes, and then they are mapped to the institutional student learning outcomes, PSLO for program student learning outcomes, ISLO for institutional student learning outcomes. The program student learning outcomes and the institutional student learning outcomes alignment is determined usually by the curriculum coordinators at our institution. And then the faculty who are developing the course outlines get to determine the alignment between the course student learning outcomes and the program student learning outcomes. I do really quickly want to take you over to, let me see if I can get task stream over on this screen. For behind the scenes mapping, I just wanted to show you an example of what I'm talking about on task stream itself. So here, I might as well check that in for the time being. You can see the course objectives, and then you can see all of the different areas to which this course objective is aligned. It's aligned to several areas. This is actually an error in alignment that was done by faculty. Originally, we had placed the responsibility of behind the scenes mapping in the hands of the faculty. This was before I took over. And as you can see, it resulted in some confusion. But this is a bit overwhelming when you compare it to, so this one objective is aligned to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas. And when you compare it to this, you know, each course outcome is aligned to one PSLO and one corresponding ISLO, which makes things a lot easier for the faculty. So TaskStream ultimately works for about 85 to 90% of our institution's assessment needs, but it doesn't account for all of them. But for the people who TaskStream doesn't work for, they already have their own assessment paradigm in place. And it requires a little bit of work on my part, but I just try to retrofit what they're doing into the paradigm that we have right now. My recommendation to anybody who's using a new software is if a current system of data collection is already working, like print, email, spreadsheets, whatever it is, don't force immediate buy-in into this software that you're using. Let your faculty utilize the method of reporting out that they typically use, and then see if the software has the functionality to allow them to transfer. If the work of the transfer is too much, or if the transfer is impossible because the software isn't robust enough, then it's best just to let people continue doing what they're doing. And like I said, for 85 to 90% of the programs on our campus and the faculty on our campus, TaskStream is great. But I'm going to give you one example. I'm going to show you one of our engineering faculty's spreadsheet. This is their mechanism for data collection. This right here would work really well on TaskStream. Placing it there would be a little bit difficult. It would be a timely process. But in addition to that, this faculty member, this curriculum coordinator, also has this, and they have this, and they have this, and they have this, and they have, there are, I think there are more too. But there's so much information available there that TaskStream is just not robust enough to account for all of the nuances and idiosyncrasies of her assessment paradigm. Also, she's been using that process for the past 5 or 6 years, and it's very effective. It's very efficient. ABET is happy with it. Her faculty are happy with it, even though it looks incredibly complicated. They understand how it works. They've been trained appropriately. For me to tell her, let's shift this over to TaskStream for the sake of conformity, it just doesn't seem to serve a purpose. We have about 2 areas on campus that have the same issue. One is the one engineering program that we have. Another one is math, the GER mechanism by which they report. So the one mistake that we made, well, we made many and we've discussed them here today, but one of the mistakes that we made for TaskStream was we started by taking it immediately to scale, which resulted in the steep learning curve for faculty. And I know I've mentioned that several times and alluded to it as well. The corrective suggestion for me is to start small, create program workspaces, and allow course level data generation to occur off software if a system is already in place, and encourage slow adaptation into the software system that you're using, because taking it to scale and then asking for complete buy-in, again, it's that bulldozing approach that people take, and it's just not always the best approach to shoot for, you know? So I suppose that's about it. I think I skipped one of my figures. I apologize, folks. I have any supplementary information that people see if you need it. I'm all set, gang.
Okay, thanks, Kirk. So if folks want to, I don't see, there are no comments in the chat right now, but you know, the floor is open now for questions, either in the chat or if you want to say something, feel free to chime in. Maybe I'll ask a question of those who are here. I mean, are you doing anything? I thought it was really good how you saw 2 really different approaches, right, to assessment project management, and I think that I'm curious if anybody else has a radically different model than the 2 that were presented here today.
So I guess if nobody's got anything there, I see some things coming across on the chat.
Yeah, the chat. You can see those now, Kirk?
I can see some things coming across.
Yeah, Helen.
My question is, I'm just curious as to how many people are going through a similar a similar shift from top-down assessment to bottom-up assessment. When I go to conferences, I hear some people talking a little bit about, wow, we have to make that shift as well, away from kind of more of an authoritarian approach. But are there other people who are going through this shift right now, or who have currently underwent this shift? I'm wondering if it's a broader trend or if it's just something that kind of happened here. Oh, there we go. We've got somebody saying they're just shifting to bottom up. Happy to talk to anybody who's going through it.
Yeah, and I think our experience was really opposite of that. So we were always like this bottom up, and now we're shifting to leadership that's very advanced in it and driving the process forward.
I really appreciated, Kirk, your comment about TaskStream and the last bit about, not forcing those who have other solutions that work for them into it, especially if it can't handle. I chuckled when you showed that spreadsheet.
And she's one of our strongest assessment people on campus, and it was so unfortunate because she was also one of the most frustrated and it was really a revelation to me when I realized that, holy cow, the angriest people on this campus are all the most competent people in the realm of assessment. Almost every one of them was accredited by some regional programmatic accreditor, and the reason that they were frustrated was because they were always getting bulldozed into some new assessment paradigm without being consulted in any capacity. And I can understand both sides of it, because they were historically perturbed by the approach that was originally used. Administration didn't want to confront them because they wanted to avoid that uncomfortable situation, and then that just kind of perpetuated this cycle. But yeah, it was absolutely amazing. And she's one of the few. I have her. I have a coordinator in physical therapy, and I think we have Beth, who does the general education requirement. She was on the original GEAR committee, and she's been doing it the same way, I think, for 10 years now. And I'm like, we're not going to make you put this on task stream if the functionality of the software is not going to work. And I think there's this push sometimes that if you're this much money on this software, Ollie, you're going to have to use it. And it's like, well, that's true, but let's not, go back to that authoritarian approach to assess. I think it's antiquated, and we need to get as far away from it as we possibly can.
Yeah, I concur, Kirk. I think that over time, allowing for that diversity makes people realize that they can own the process too, and that it's not just about checking boxes and getting it done.
Definitely.
I think it's telling too that both of you are faculty first, and I'm guessing both of you started out on your campus as faculty, and I think that definitely makes a big difference. I mean, my guess is, it's total a guess, that the campuses that are struggling most to implement assessment don't always have faculty on the front lines of the initiative, and there's that, and that's not to fault people who are not faculty leading assessment initiatives. It's just that it's a difficult, if you're not a faculty member, to understand faculty perspective, and there's just miscommunication, I think, that happens. So
I agree with you on that, and that again, just like you said, there's no insult to anybody who's in an administrative position who is taking on the brunt of the work for assessment. It's a commendable effort, and it's very difficult. But my background with faculty has really helped a lot, not only in terms of treating. You're teaching assessment ultimately, but you're also creating a culture of assessment similar to creating a classroom dynamic as a teacher. So for me, it was such a seamless transfer and such an intuitive transfer. And the more that I moved forward, the more I realized the reason the faculty weren't as receptive to the ideas was because they weren't necessarily being treated in the same fashion that we would treat students. You have to treat them with dignity and respect and cultivate rapport with them and things like that. And you have to listen to students. And it seems so intuitive, like, yes, that's the right answer. But a lot of people struggle with that at times, when they're trying to utilize a system like this.
Mm-hmm. And I can just share that the bulk of my work, so I am a faculty first and foremost, and then to step into doing administrative and staff, functional area assessment was quite a learning curve just about how the institution operates. But I think my faculty role helped those people see the connection between the service that they're providing and bridging that right back to student success, which is always emphasized in assessment. So how is my work as, financial aid office directly impacting the student experience? So I feel like my contact with students, and again, like you're saying, Kirk, the teaching bridges that gap.
Definitely.
And again, our emails are up here, so if anyone wants to contact us or reach out to SCOA, please feel free to do that.
And I just put, again, the workplace group where I'll post the recording up in the chat, and my email as well. And so I guess if no one else has any questions or comments, we'll end now. And I thank you both for a great presentation. You get the single clap from me, and I'm sure everyone else is clapping on their end as well.
I'll clap for Nicole.
And for everyone, we're so excited to of this community of practice. So thanks for
and we thank your internet lag too, Nicole, unfortunately. Oh well. Okay,
Well, thanks
guys.
a lot. Thanks a lot, folks, for coming. That was I really think it's
This is great. Thank you both. I'll stop.